So this is Vlogmas. Welcome back to Vlogmas. We are winding down, and today I want to talk I'm recording this a little bit early, but I'll be sharing this on Christmas Eve. So my focus is on expectation and anticipation. Of course, that's what Advent is about. The entire season is a period of time of expectation and anticipation. And those two words we can often use interchangeably, but they're not quite the same. There's some differences between them. And they can seem to be subtle, but I think that they really are something different. I often use them together, and I'm sure sometimes people think I'm being redundant, but as I think about what is expectation? Expectation is believing something is going to come to pass, believing something to be or to become. So the people of Israel, for more than generations, for centuries, had an expectation of the Messiah. It's prophesied, the prophets, particularly Isaiah, but Hosea, Amos, Joel, Jeremiah, all the prophets in one way or another, and even the prophets who didn't have entire books dedicated to their ministry, but whose words were contained in other passages of Scripture, spoke to the coming Messiah. Even David and the Psalms of David and other Psalms point to Jesus, right? And so there's all this prophecy, and they had an expectation. They had an expectation not only that he would come, but they also had an expectation of how he would come. They thought, because the promise was that he would be in the line of David, that he would come in the way of David, that he would be a conquering king. David was the king who defeated all the nations. And so I'm sure that over the years, and knowing that the Israelites were people constantly in some conflict with a neighboring nation, I'm sure they were waiting, whether they were in captivity or whether they were occupied in their own land, they were constantly in conflict. And so their expectation was not that just that Jesus would come, but Jesus would be this conquering hero and that he would overcome all of their adversaries. That was an expectation. They took the promise, and the promise of the Messiah, the chosen one, coming, they expanded that into what they understood based on their historic memory, their experiences, of what they saw as their need and desire and their hope. And so that was the expectation. So that they not only were looking forward to his coming, but they were looking forward to it in a particular way. Anticipation, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily have to have the expectations along with it. So if they had been anticipating a Messiah coming, but not having sort of these expectations with it, many of them might have recognized Jesus a little bit earlier than they did. Some never did or have. So I think about that, and you think about the ones who thought, is this the case? The ones who Palm Sunday were, laying out the palms and cheering as Jesus entered in, putting their cloaks down so that the donkey's feet, the feet of the donkey wouldn't even hit the ground, because they thought, well, finally, our king is arriving, and this is as close as we can do to create a royal procession of this king who's going to come in. And I guess their expectation would be that they were going to overcome or overthrow the Roman Empire. Jesus wasn't necessarily interested in that sort of political victory at the time. It's much larger than just this one little Roman Empire in God's eyes. I mean, obviously for the people, they're under this occupation by Rome. Rome's in power. It's causing whatever struggles that they were encountering because of that rule. They were subjected to that. And they're thinking, when the Messiah comes, for the people of that era, they're thinking the Messiah is going to deliver them from that. That was their expectation. But I imagine that those who accepted and most readily followed Jesus, beyond seeing the miracles, beyond being impressed with his teaching, because a lot of crowds heard his teaching and were impressed. A lot of people, if they did not witness the miracles themselves, would have heard about them, would have seen the people who were healed after. So there's all this manifestation of Jesus and his power during that time. People are still not quite believing, even though Jesus is showing all these signs, because his arrival didn't meet their expectation. But if they had just been anticipating that God was going to show up and do something through someone, and being open to whatever that looked like, I imagine that was the attitude of those who accepted Jesus most readily. I don't know how you're going to show up, Lord. I just want to see you when you do. And I think that sometimes in our prayer lives, in our spiritual life, we can lose track because we have an expectation of who God is and what God is going to be in our lives and how God is going to show up. And when God shows up, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And then God shows up, and God has a different plan. And so things aren't the way that we expected them to be. It shakes our faith. Even when we can see the hand of God at work, because it's not meeting our expectation. And there's a little dissonance there. It's not quite coming together. But if we're just open, I don't know how you're going to do it, Lord, but bless. Then we look for the signs of God versus the signs of what it is we want God to do. And we're more readily able to be in line with God's purpose, plans, and will for us when we are looking for God and looking forward to what God is going to do and accepting without expectation. So of how that's going to look like, of the exact manifestation of it. So all that's to say, expectation is not a bad. There's a place for expectation, but I think there's a greater place for anticipation. The openness of my eyes are open. I'm looking, I'm attentive, and when God shows up, I'm looking to see what God is doing and how I fit into that versus I need God to do this for me. I do think there's a place for expectation. I really do. I pray in expectation all the time. I pray with specificity all the time. But I also know that sometimes God's answer has a but in there. No, but no to this, but this is what's coming. Or yes, but yes, you can have this, but it's going to cost this. There's it's not as straightforward as we often expect it to be. Part of that, God works through us as human beings many times in order to fulfill God's plans. And we're not perfect, and we're not always predictable. I think God kind of predicts how we act because God knows us so well. But we all know that we can't predict. Someone just might be having a bad day and not be amenable, and then all of a sudden your well-laid plans go by the wayside. But it doesn't mean that God isn't faithful if things don't work out just the way that we expect them to. Sometimes God's no is better than the yes that we want for what we think will be the best thing to do. This Sunday, and I'm recording this on Sunday, I preached about Joseph. And I talked about, Joseph was a faithful man, a good man. There's no disputing that. No, I've never heard anyone, scholar, believer, anyone say something wasn't right about Joseph. And I'm talking about Mary's husband, Joseph. But in the text from Matthew, the focus is on Joseph's visit from the angel to say, no, go ahead. You can marry Mary. Don't set her aside. Whatever you think you should do to deal with the situation, that she's pregnant, baby's not yours. Let me just imagine all the things going through his mind and how he was going to deal with this. And even though the plan that he had was not a bad plan, he was planning to set her aside. And at that time, being engaged was almost like being married. So it was almost like if he set her aside publicly, it would be like a public divorce. And the only justification for that would have been infidelity. And so she would likely have been stoned for that, at worst, best ostracized. So there were going to be some really harsh consequences. And so this graceful man says, I don't want to harm her, but I'm not going to marry her. I'm going to set her aside quietly, so nobody will know, or she won't be harmed unduly by this. And it talks about him thinking about it. It doesn't say a word about him praying about it. He was a righteous man, but it doesn't say a word about him saying, Lord, what should I do? So God has to break in. And he sends a messenger, sends the angel into a dream. Not the Joseph of the Old Testament who dreamed a lot, but this New Testament Joseph who has this dream where the angel meets him there and says, you will name this child. In other words, you will be the father figure for this child. And long story short, he wakes up for the dream, marries Mary right away, no hesitation. He follows. He had an expectation of what their relationship was going to be like. Things weren't going the way he thought. The angel comes to him and says, this is the way it's going to be. And because he was open, he was able to walk in his purpose. In this Christ event, his purpose was simply to be the father figure who was, in fact, of the line of David, so that connection would be there. Without Joseph, that part of the promise would have been unmet, and there would have been those who would not have accepted Jesus as Messiah just for that reason. And so Joseph's yes led to probably millions and millions, if not billions, of people throughout history accepting Jesus as the Son of Man and the Son of God, and Lord of their lives, sovereign over their lives. Because Joseph didn't let an unmet expectation stop him from fulfilling God's will. I'm sure he didn't know from that point what it was going to be like with his son Jesus. And I'm sure there were a lot of really interesting days, most of which, the vast majority of which, are not recorded. We don't hear a lot from Joseph after that, maybe once or twice. But we know he had a profound influence over Jesus' life. And we know that he was there through his childhood and his rearing. And we know that he was faithful to the call that God had on his life. He moved from expectation to what I am in my spiritual imagination believing. He moved to anticipation. Lord, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I'm here. It's like the prophet, was it Jeremiah, who was called at a young age, and it is Isaiah. The prophet who was called and heard is Isaiah asking, who go for us? And said, Lord, send me. You don't know where you're going. Isaiah, Jeremiah, at this point. You can Google it if you really want to know which one it was. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. My prayer for us, for myself included, as all my prayers during this Vlogmas and Advent season have been and will continue to be, that we'll be open to the light of Christ in us and shining through us in whatever form that takes. That we will embrace anticipation the same way we embrace expectation. Expectation is Christmas morning, waking up, there are gifts under the tree, and you expect certain things perhaps. But after a while you get older and I don't know, I think that the older I get, the less I care. I mean, I honestly, at this point in my life, the gifts don't matter to me. They don't. When I was a kid, and I think this is, a natural thing, when I was a kid, that was the highlight. For me, it's about the connections, the relationship. And I don't know where my joy on Christmas Day is necessarily going to come from. This year, I've moved from where I was associate pastor. We had a Christmas Day service followed by a community meal. And that day, and it was a long day, because after that, then I would go, typically not leaving the church until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I would go about my day and visit friends and family and spend time with them. I didn't know where the joy is going to come in the day. Unlike when I was a kid and I knew we used to go to Christmas Eve Mass, midnight. And so then the whole day was free and wake up. Now, I was not the kid. I was a kid who I loved my sleep. And I loved sleeping in, I should say. I didn't care about staying up late. I could stay up late at night. I didn't care how much sleep I got, but sleeping in, I loved it. So like Christmas Day was another day for me to sleep in. So I was not the kid who would be up at the crack of dawn. Can we open a present? No, I'd wake up when they would be waiting on me and sometimes waking me up. And so but part of that was because I had an expectation. I mean, sometimes I would get surprises, but most of the time I knew what was under the tree. And so the expectation was there. And they were being met. And so that sort of that anticipatory, what's it going to be? Where's it coming from? I didn't have that. Now, this is the first year I'm pastoring a church. We have a Christmas Eve service. So Christmas Day, I have no plans. It's 3 days away. I have no plans for the day. Now, I know I'll have breakfast with my sister and my niece. Beyond that, I have no plans. I might just stay home the rest of the day. I have no idea where the joy is going to come from that day. I have no idea what's going to have meaning in that day. But I know it's going to be there. I'm anticipating it, but I'm not expecting to come from a particular quarter. And there's a certain peace that comes from that. And it doesn't diminish my hope. It just leaves me open, and it changes the character and nature of the day for me. So I continue as in my rambling along at this point to pray that the spirit of anticipation will be as strong or even stronger in you and for you during this Advent season, and will carry you through even the coming year, that you will embrace God doing what God will do in the way that God will do it, while you have eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to understand and to feel and to yearn for God's presence. Thanks be to God. Once again, thanks be to God, who gives us in all things the victory, who gives us hope, who gives us joy, peace, and love, who gives us so much of what we ask for in expectation, but also promises so much greater if we live yet in anticipation as well. My prayer for you, as always, to let the light of Christ shine in you and through you throughout this Advent season. Until the next time, and the next video will be on Christmas Day, let me just say, be blessed and Merry Christmas.